Hello and welcome. I'm Susan Smith. We're in my studio, Stitched by Susan, and we're, surprise, surprise, quilting today. So thank you so much for joining in. A brief introduction in case you are new. I'm a long arm quilter, and these live and unscripted episodes are most frequently an edge to edge, all over quilting project from beginning to end in one session. So right from loading the quilt onto the long arm, through the quilting process, and straight to unloading. And occasionally, as I am this week, I will load a custom project that I think might be of interest to quilters. And kind of my purpose for these episodes by and large is to just sort of let you look over my shoulder and see my workflow and process and how I work through decisions and even challenges that relate to the particular quilt that I'm working on. Because quilting is so solitary, right? There's tips and things that you can really pick up from just watching a person do it. And sort of edited, scripted, produced YouTube videos don't do that for you as much. So that's my intention with these live and unscripted episodes, is to just make them, they're uncut. You know, you'll see thread breaks, you'll see tension issues maybe, you'll see sometimes issues with my machine and alarms going off. Whatever happens, it's all part of the process and it's included in the video. My mic is falling off my ear. So anyway, like I said, live, you get to see all the little bits behind the scene, but I hope that they're helpful for you to just kind of show you how I think through the process of different quilts. So we are now on my Facebook page, which you probably know, and this is live and interactive, so feel free to chat into the comments, and while I'm talking, maybe let me know where you're watching from. If you're brand new, this is the first time you found me, maybe let me know how you found out about me. But then after this goes live, and while it is live, by the way, you're welcome to share. Lower right-hand corner of your screen usually has a share button. If you have friends that you think would be interested, or guild members or whatever, feel free to share these posts with them, especially now while it's live, and then people could join and be interactive. But after the live event is over, we do upload them to YouTube, usually within about 24 hours, and so you can come back and watch the replays at any time. Obviously, the chat window is then not live, but you can still type in questions and I will see them and try to respond as quickly as I can to your questions there. So let's see, what else? A couple new things in my life lately. I've launched a podcast. I think the first episodes went out just over 2 weeks ago. And each Wednesday morning, a new one is dropping. So episode 5 will be dropping tomorrow morning. So all those episodes are interviews with other, so far quilters, but eventually will include other crafters. And my intent there is to just share with you stories and create some sense of community. I just feel this need in myself, and I think you all are probably in the same situation, this need for community and connection. And so I hope some of these stories and interviews will sort of bring the quilting world closer. And I'm sure in every field this is true, but because quilting is my field, I am astounded by the number of, and the variety of ways that crafting and quilting have integrated and meant so much in people's lives. And so those are some of the things that I'm trying to share, from the mom who lost 2 of her sons in quick succession to cancer and, you know, needed a way to cope, to the lady who was in a bad car accident and found sewing to be her way of dealing with chronic pain over a period of some years. Like, quilting has really been therapy for people. So not all the stories are that dramatic, but anyway, so that's the podcast. You can find that at podcast.stitchedbysusan.com. And when you go there, you'll be able to choose your favorite sort of app to listen to it on. And I'd love if you would, subscribe and even leave me a little review. That would be ever so helpful, so I know if the stories are reaching you, if there's other things you'd like to hear, all that kind of stuff. Okay, on to today's project. Maybe before I start, I'll say hello to folks. I've got to take my glasses off to read the screen, and I'll get sips of coffee in between. Let's see, who's chiming in this morning? Marion from Florida. I got it. And Dana Lee from Pembroke, Ontario. Ontario is my home province. Francoise from Belgium. Nice. Francoise, you come frequently. Welcome again. Charmaine from, I don't know. I should know, Charmaine. I've seen your name lots of times before. And Maureen from Central Pennsylvania. Mickey from North Georgia. Linda, hi Susan and Dave. Some of you are old friends. So glad to see you. Eileen, Truscott, Robin, love these. Good. Good to know. Charmaine from Calgary. I'm so happy to see you again. I'm working on an all-over feather on a Victoria's quilt for cancer. The second in 2 days using all your wonderful ideas. Working on turning corners and making the feather plumes more consistent. Good. You should see some real improvement over 2 quilts. You should like nail that down into your muscle memory. Linda watching from Norwich, UK. And Jenny from Oregon. Kathy from Cleellum, Washington. That's practically my next door neighbor. And that's it so far. Okay, well, thanks for tuning in where you're from. Behind the scenes is my husband Dave, who is, as always, behind the cameras and the wires and the monitors and all that stuff, keeping all the juggling balls in the air and rolling. So, one more sip. All right, we're on our way. And speaking of coffee, if you're interested in supporting these free episodes, buymeacoffee.com is an easy way to just make a one-time contribution, your choice of amount. And the minimum, I think, is $5. So basically, for the price of one coffee, you can say, yay, thanks for providing these episodes. And it helps us to get closer to our goal of getting some upgraded camera equipment. Currently, we work with little tiny webcams and smartphones. And we'd really like to do a little bit more professional job. So that's our goal. Okay, on to today's project. I showed a picture of it in the event page. Hang on. The glasses and the mics are all not working well together. There we go. Okay. I showed a picture in the event page. This pattern is called The Mountains Are Calling. And it's by Janet Nesbitt of One Sister Designs, I believe. You can find her on Instagram, Facebook, all the places. And it is a flannel quilt. And it is going to be a custom project. It's not highly detailed, but because there are so many areas, I think they can be played up and magnified a little bit with custom quilting. And I'm coming at this from a point of experience because actually when Janet wrote this pattern, I got to quilt her cover photo. And so I've already quilted this once before. And my client who brought this quilt to me really liked the quilting designs that were on that one. So we're simplifying a couple of them just to speed it up a little bit, but overall I'm doing a very similar design. So I've got my notes handy to me at the side, and I've also got my computer loaded up with pictures of the first version of this quilt that I did to kind of remind myself how I arranged the quilting and exactly what I did in each area. To save time, because I am hoping to do this all in one session, I've already preloaded the quilt today. And I know loading is usually part of my morning routine in these episodes, but you can watch any of the other episodes and find that process in it. But for today, I've already gone ahead and loaded. There's a flannel backing. I've loaded the batting, which my client provided. It is warm and natural this time, which is 100% cotton and fairly low loft. Because we've got flannel, we don't necessarily need to add more loft and certainly not more heaviness necessarily to the quilt. And then I've basted this top area of my quilt only. Dave's pointing to the screen. I'm guessing there's a question. Maureen, I just got this quilt from a customer to quilt and can't believe you're doing this today. I will get great ideas from you. Thank you. Good. That will work out in a timely fashion. And looking back, I don't think I really shared a lot of pictures before the original quilt I did for Janet Nesbitt, the designer. So I'll make sure and share good photos of this one, good close-ups. And Sam Alberts is checking in. Yay! Yeah, Sam, how's your finger? By the way, speaking of the podcast, Sam was the guest on last week's episode, so be sure and catch that one. Sam has some great stories to share. Okay, to start with, I am going to do some detailed quilting in all of these flying geese, and it is going to involve some ruler work, and so I'm going to load my ruler plate. Now, different machines I know have different, pardon me while I'm rattling around in my equipment here. Different machines have different plates, but mine has this metal, which camera are we on? That one. And Gamel's backwards. There you go. This hard metal plate, which is clasped on with a spring, and this allows me to have a surface to put my ruler on. If I were to just put it on the arm of my machine, it would wobble and be very unstable. So if you're going to do any ruler work at all, you vastly need to have a ruler plate. Dave's wanting to change cameras to show this going on, but it's really not that big a deal. Is it working? There we go. So instead of having this narrow area then and trying to balance my ruler on that, I will have the width of this plate. It acts like a little kind of mini table. It's a bit of a pain to get on, but it snaps right into place, and now I've got me a nice sturdy working surface for my ruler. Get everything back in place there. Some of the decisions that I make as I quilt just have to do with the particular project in mind. So for example, I usually use these long side stretchers, and I like them because they hold this whole area of the quilt nice and taut. But because I'm working with my ruler this morning, I've rolled the beginning of my quilt much closer to me, and this actually won't fit in. So for my first pass, I've just got clamps on here. It's not ideal, but it will do the trick, and they're not pulling very tightly. And then, of course, because my ruler plate is going to conflict with these clamps, I bring out my trusty yardstick and I prop them up just a little bit. And now I should be able to move my ruler plate without bumping into those clamps. Let's just double check that. It still bumps a little on this front one. We'll lift them a bit more. We're good to go. Okay. I am going to be changing thread colors throughout the quilt, but I've chosen the mid blue of the background for my bobbin thread, and I'm going to do the same bobbin thread throughout. That is not always the case. I'm just looking for my ruler, which I have set down this morning. Pardon me while I go out of camera. I often make my bobbin thread match whatever I'm doing on the top, but because this quilt has quite a bit of thickness, because it's flannel top and bottom, right? I feel like I can get away with using the same bobbin thread throughout, and it won't show through onto the front surface of my quilt. That's something I may have to shift as I go along, but that's my working hypothesis. So here we go. Starting in the upper left-hand corner. So as always, this is not really a class, so I'm not going to talk you through the how of everything that I do, but more the why of the decisions that I've made. And then you just get to watch as I carry out the stuff. And I don't have tons of room to work, like excess fabric on the sides of this, so I just have to be careful with clamps and rulers and etc. to try not to be bumping into each other. So my client request was for this kind of swoop in each goose, and I'm just freehanding that arc in. From there, I'm going to do a fairly fine stipple in the dark navy sort of sky areas, if you will. And you will not be able to see that on camera, but I'll try and get some photographs afterwards with some good light and shadow happening. All that I'm trying to accomplish with this is to make the background, the navy part, or the very dark blue part, recede into the background. So that's kind of why I chose a stipple. It needed to be something fairly fine to make that navy recede into the background. Does that make sense? There's any number of things I could have quilted there, but I want it to be more dense quilting than whatever's in the geese, so that the geese are a little more prominent and the background is pushed into the background. Because this is flannel, my client, sort of looking ahead, did a great job of thinking through her seam allowances, and she has in fact chosen to press them open. I appreciate that because flannel seams can get super bulky in a hurry and be really difficult to quilt. This does, however, influence a little bit my stitching in the ditching, in that I'm not stitching right in the ditch. I'm stitching actually a few threads off to the side, because if you can envision that seam allowance pressed open, I don't want to stitch right down the seam. That will just be catching the stitching threads, and that would not be good. So I am purposely stitching slightly to one side or the other of that seam allowance at all times. So that time across, I actually stitched on the light blue, on the lighter geese, and I realized that shows up a lot more. So in future, I'm now going to stitch my ditch on the dark side as often as I can. I think it looks better. Then you don't see the actual stitching, you just see the indentation of the quilting. I am just freehanding these arcs. You certainly could get out a round ruler and do it that way. I'm just taking it easy because some of these seam allowances still are very thick and my hopper foot is wanting to push them out of the way. And so if I just slow down a little, I can ease it over the hump, so to speak. So my ditch stitching is less than about a 1/16 of an inch off the actual seam. So I'm catching 2 or 3 good threads of the fabric that's on the edges. I'm putting an arc in there that would be in behind. I'm putting an arc in there. I have no idea how much of this detail you can actually see on camera, but I'll keep telling you all about it all the same. If there are long quiet stretches, it's because I do have to pay attention, especially on these dark fabrics, to know where I have quilted and where I have yet to quilt. And I can't always keep my mouth engaged and have my words come out clearly and concentrate, not make any boo-boos. I'm so appreciative of Dana's efforts to keep these, Dana is my client by the way, to keep these seams manageable. Because even with her pressing them open, as you see, I'm sometimes really struggling to get over them. When I quilted the original quilt of this design, the seams were even a little thicker, and I actually had to pound them. And I'm going to tell you guys about that, because that might be a thing you at some time need to employ as well. When I have a super thick seam that my hopper foot literally can't straddle, I put something firm under my machine, usually more firm than just the table. It'll be some kind of wood piece, and I cover a hammer or mallet with a piece of fabric. Flannel is a good choice. You can just hold it around with your other hand and literally thump that seam a few times. And a few quick thumps will flatten a seam allowance quite a bit. So if that's something you're encountering, that is one way to deal with it, and it's almost miraculous. It's important, though, that you do cover your whatever mallet you're using with a piece of fabric, especially on flannel, or you almost damage the fibers, like they look crushed, if that makes sense. So it's a bit of a delicate operation. But it's a way to deal with these heavy, heavy seams when you otherwise could not get over them. My nose is about 8 inches from the quilt, and even so, I can hardly see when this background has been quilted. I'm always looking back to make sure I've covered every area between the little geese. So I am hoping to finish this quilt in one session today. It's going to be longer than 2 hours for sure. I don't know how long exactly it's going to take. I suspect closer to 4. So don't be in a rush. Set up your own sewing if you wish, and we'll just sew together. Or, you know, check in once an hour and see how progress is being made, whatever's working for you. I don't know what your day is holding. Those of you who are regulars maybe recall that I wasn't going to do a live and unscripted today. But this quilt came in and it's so unique, it really, really is, that I thought it would be enjoyable for you to see how this gets done. If you receive my newsletter, I actually put a link in there for the pattern in case any of you are wanting to do it. And I'll tell you from my own point of view. Well, do you know what? I better stop talking because I missed one of my lines back here. So now I'm back to it. I better pay attention. When I stop to advance the quilt, I'll tell you my own bright idea about this quilt. I'm kind of fudging my way across this row of geese. I was following a more consistent path, and I kind of didn't follow that in the last one, so I'm trying to get this one set of geese finished all the way across and then go back to that same step 1, step 2, step 3. That helps me not to forget areas. Okay, here we go, across the top of the geese. Once again, I did not follow my path. You'd think I'd learn. That's okay. I will cover all the areas. I meant to do the arcs going back this way. But I'll go ahead and finish my little meander. And now we'll do the arcs going the other direction. Whoops. Sorry about that. When I speed up, my ruler plate really rattles. So because I did that foolishness, I'm actually going to have to break thread because I'm not at a good position to travel. So when I, let me just think through which way I want to go now. I want to start up here. Excuse me one sec. I'm going to find something dark to lay across the upper edge of the quilt here. We get such high light contrast going on, and the camera's always trying to adjust. My trusty smartphone camera, which thinks it knows what I want. So if we lay something dark over that, that may help in keeping that light from flashing so much. I just need to be able to see the edge of the quilt, of course. Bear with me while I get that rearranged a little. There we go. There's no law about more or less breaking of thread, you know. It's kind of a little puzzle, a mental puzzle for me to figure out how to go along all these geese and travel from one area to the next without having to break the thread. And if I think it through, I can do it. I'm going to do arcs next. I just find them easier going up. And that's just my personal preference. Stitch in the ditch on the top edge. And then go back up with the stipple. So, in case you are at home in your quilting studio working today, let me know what you're working on. Are you long arm quilting? Are you piecing a quilt? And here I'm needing to make an adjustment. My ruler plate is extending further than I'm used to toward my front rail, and I've just bumped up against it. So I'm not going to panic about it. I'm just going to break right into a stipple. But now that my needle is away from there, I'm going to insert a pin so that I remember when I'm back in this area next that I need to get that stitching in the ditch there. Make sense? So that will just be my little... It's like tying a string on my finger to remind myself. My little meander for scale is about probably 3/8 inch spaces. It's a little more than a 1/4 inch, less than a half. So that would be about 3/8. And I'm just watching where my last swoop of meandering fell, and I left a kind of jagged, irregular edge there. And then I can just fit this one alongside it, and viewing it afterwards, it will appear seamless. The ruler I'm using, by the way, is my trusty favorite. It's by A1, which is a long arm brand, and it's a 9-inch straight ruler. And what I love best about this ruler is the handle, the gripping mechanism. And my thread is shredding and breaking, so I'm going to just pause right there and thread my needle fresh. I'm just turning the light on for a moment so I can see my needle. And maybe you sharp watchers noticed that I missed my swoop in one flying goose. So since I have broken thread anyways, I'm going to knit back in there and do that right now. And by the way, you feel free to be my accountability partners on that side of the screen and let me know if I've missed stuff on the way by. Looking back at my geese, they've all got swoops in them. Good. Whew. Alrighty. Back to my meandering. The beautiful thing about this meandering is how well you can make it fit into any space. And so that's what I needed in a background fill, because I do have these irregularly shaped areas behind the geese in the sun. And there's any number of fills that would fit the bill. But as you can see, the quilting doesn't really show. I just need it to be a bit tighter to push that navy into the background. Let's not forget the swoops. Because I can move around so easily with the meander too, I just set myself up to know, where I'm starting at my entrance into that background area and then where I want to end. And I just maneuver so that I end up where I'm ready to do my next, usually stitching in the ditch. So here, for example, I'm beginning obviously here and I want to end up at this corner so that I can travel. Are we seeing my finger? There's my finger, sort of. You can see me down here. I want to end up at this corner for traveling purposes. So I'll just make sure that my meander comes to that corner last. And it's just that simple, to not have to then break thread or move around. I just use my meander as my traveling instrument. And here again, I want to end up at the point of this little goose down here in a moment, so I'm going to fill in this area and end right at the point of that goose. Just like that. And launch into my ditch stitching. Just thinking through where I want to travel with this. You can see I've got clamps, individual clamps on this side too. I'm not sure if you can see all the way out to the edge, but again, I have a yardstick holding them sort of up and out of the way. Again, here I've looked ahead and determined where I want to be ending with my meander, and I'm going to make my way in that direction at the bottom corner of this night sky. And I'm going to pause right there and advance the quilt. I'm just going to double check that my geese have all got a swoop. I believe they do. Yes, do we have some questions? Which side shall I be on, Dave, for the camera, or does it matter? I'm just undoing all my strappings and things. Alrighty, have we got some questions? I'm going to get a sip of a drink while we do that, and I'll try not to gulp. Eileen, do you always take pictures of your quilts for future inspiration? If so, how do you organize them? Tough question, Eileen. That's a problem that I face because I have so many hundreds of photos currently. So I do use Google Photos for one thing because that offers me a lot of free storage. And within Google Photos, you can create albums. So that's my current kind of method. So I take them on my smartphone and they automatically upload to Google Photos, and that's where they live. I pretty much always take photos of my quilts. There's hardly ever a quilt that I do not. Whether I want to post it on social media, whether I want to put a pin in Pinterest. I haven't mentioned today, I use Pinterest boards as a place to store my past photographs, in particular so that clients have an easy way to find photographs, right? So if they come to me with a quilt and don't know what they want quilted on it, far easier than surfing through my hundreds of photos, right, for particular pictures that I'm thinking of, a particular fan design, for example, that I did last year or the year before. So I keep Pinterest boards, and I just have a gallery for custom quilting and a gallery for edge-to-edge quilting. And it's really easy to give clients a link to that. So I don't post a ton of pictures of any one quilt in there, but usually a good sampling, that shows the quilting, if that makes sense. So, long answer to a short question. Jeannie, good morning, Susan and Dave from New Brunswick. Excited to learn while I'm finishing up a border. Fantastic. Glad you're joining in, Jeannie. And am I saying your name right, Jeannie, or do you prefer just Jean? And I'll try and remember it. Rose, I'm blanket stitching on a raw edge applique wall hanging called Here a Chick, There a Chick. So cute. It's a UFO I'm determined to finish. Good on ya. Mickey, hemming curtains. Oh, fantastic. Nice. And Jill, I'm cutting for a block of the month, trying to get all 6 months cut at once. Efficient cutting, yeah. Sam, I'm long arming a Quiltworks table topper, very custom. And Quiltworks, if you're not familiar with that, usually has a lot of interesting angles and irregularities kind of to deal with. So good for you, Sam. Laurel, hoping to finish my feather project and then pack up for a small, quaint country retreat with fellow quilting friends. How nice, how nice. Enjoy. Oh, there's more yet. I'm getting fast, ahead of myself. And I'm quilting a 9-patch Linus project quilt, practicing echo flowers. Excellent. And Sam, stipple is my all-time favorite design, mostly because I love snuggly quilts, but also it is so versatile. Yeah, for a long period of time, stipple got a bad rap as kind of a, I don't know, a cop-out. And I still don't love to see it on entire quilts when it's, you know, this big of a stipple, and it's like you spent 20 hours piecing the quilt and you spent 10 minutes clapping that quilt on. But it makes a fantastic background and texture. You're absolutely right. Okay, I'll stop nattering on about that. Dave, for the record, Susan is not responsible for the poll questions. I get into trouble all on my own. True story. Eileen, love watching and listening to how you decide your quilting path. Good. Dana, I'm piecing another one of Janet Nesbitt's kits called Plant Kindness. I may need your talents again soon. And by the way, this quilt belongs to that Dana who was just commenting. So thanks, Dana, for entrusting me with your quilt. Sandy, yikes, I forgot about this today. Better late than never. You bet it is. There will be lots more to come. And Sandy is quilting a friend's hand-pieced quilt for her own grandson. Oh, that's nice. Jeannie, yes, you were saying it correct. French spelling, but English pronunciation. Bilingual province. Yep, I studied French for a bajillion years and still can't really speak it. But the odd thing clicked. Okay, here's our poll. What do you think about flannel quilts? Love the soft and fuzzy. Flannel bursts into flame as it crosses my doorstep. Never done one, but I want to. Okay, so most people love the soft and fuzzy. Good. I agree. I love to snuggle under a flannel quilt. Love the cozy and love the weight of them, honestly. They're a bit like a weighted blanket before weighted blankets were a thing. They can be a challenge to quilt just because of the sheer bulk and thickness of the seams. So thank you, Dana, for thinking ahead and pressing these seams open. It has made my life a ton easier. Okay. Scarlett, so enjoy watching, listening, learning to you. Doing an E2E quilt today for a fire victim family. I love stories like that. Like, quilters everywhere are so generous. Love to be a part of that community. Okay, taking my magnets off. And I'll talk a bit more. We didn't do loading today, but I'll talk a little bit more about floating tops and things as I advance this. So I'm just setting my ruler out of the way. I think I've got everything unattached. I've left my needle down. It can just come along and move forward with me. I'm not going to take a full advance. I didn't introduce my quilting machine. Her name is Lucy. I quilt on a 26-inch gammal, so this throat space is 26 inches in my machine, which is really at arm's length for quilting. So my advance is only, you can hardly see it in the camera, but I'm maybe 2/3 of the way. I need to be able to reach better with my ruler, so I'm not going to advance really super far. But while my needle is down, I'm just going to take a moment to continue basting down the right-hand side. So I have not done a full baste on this quilt, which is to say I haven't gone ahead and basted it all the way to the bottom. I'm just basting down each side as I progress. And it's a very careful process because these little geese seams, they are a bit thick, and if I don't coax them into place, they just want to push this way and that in front of my hopper foot. So just a matter of guiding them with my other hand. I mean, another option certainly would be to pin it all into place first so it couldn't shift. I'll just attach my clamps while I'm over here. I should be able to put my stretchers on now. Should be able to. They have such, I know I've said this 100 times before, they have such thin little channels in which the fabric has to be inserted. About the thickness of a piece of flannel, let me tell you. So it's a little tricky to get that in there, but I got it. That funny view is Dave's thumb in front of the camera. Okay, Okay, forgive all the shenanigans on the camera. Apparently we forgot to turn off Do Not Disturb, or turn on Do Not Disturb. So people are disturbing us. Can't imagine that they don't know I'm quilting. So I'm over on the left-hand side now, basting this edge. I did not pin it in advance. I'm kind of eyeballing this straight line, I'll be totally honest with you. But I am certainly, my thumb and finger here are behind my sewing area, pulling on what's already been sewn, coaxing that flannel to go under the needle, sometimes pushing from the front too. It's a bit of a process. And I'm doing my basting well within a 1/4 inch seam allowance so that when Dana goes to apply her binding, this will all be hidden underneath that binding. Okay, left side is basted. So the clamps that I'm using are part of the Red Snapper family of products. And I do really like them, chiefly because they're so long. So in my 26-inch quilting area, they're 18 inches long. So they put this nice tension on the whole quilting space. I think you can see my hand there. As opposed to the individual clamps, which I have to be really careful not to get a sort of scalloped edge with individual clamps. So here's the length of the clamp. This cord is not elasticized, and it came, I felt, way too long, like it stuck way out onto the side, and when I have a big quilt, that's just too unwieldy, so hence the knot is just to shorten this up a little. As you can see, this is weighing down a bit, so that's where my yardstick comes into play to just hold the whole thing up a little. And once again, I can move around with my plate underneath and see that it can move freely without bumping into that clamp. That's my goal with this apparatus. It ain't pretty, but it does the trick. My yardsticks, by the way, were my grandfather's. They're certainly older than I am. They also are not pretty, but they do the trick. So now some decisions have to be made for what to quilt next. I am going to change, which camera am I in, hon? Ooh. Oh, hello. I am going to change thread colors for the different areas. So all the blue is one color, all the trees are one color, the mountains are one color, and so forth. So I think I'm going to now do the sun. Here's my thought process. I have not basted all the way to the front edge of the quilt. This edge is floating, which is to say it's just hanging down here in front of me. And I use my magnetic bars as a clamp to prevent any, pulling up into the area where I'm sewing, so it keeps it nice and square. But that being said, I can't, for example, quilt my green all the way to the bottom and trust that all the rest is going to come out straight and even. So I'm going to try and quilt things evenly as I work my way to the bottom. So next in line, I believe, is the sun. So Dave, I'm going to have to come around right there to change thread. Okay, so we may want a different camera like that one. This is what live is all about. You get to hear us talking through the cameras too. And I know you can't see them, so that's kind of weird, but I feel like you guys are looking at the whole thing right now. So here was my thoughts. This is not a right or wrong. These are just the decisions I make. I could continue to do the blue, and I could reach all the way to the bottom of some of these areas, but look at this blue. It goes way down to the bottom. So if I do the sun now, and then I come back and do that blue, I can continue on this edge, advance my quilt, and continue a little further down. Does that make sense? So again, no right or wrong. All I'm doing is saving myself one thread change. It's not a biggie, but it's how my little mind keeps active, thinking of these things. So I am on the other side of the machine now, changing threads. As I mentioned earlier, I'm keeping my bobbin thread the same color throughout. It's kind of the mid blue of the background, what's behind the geese. And all of my colors, the sky color was the darkest. All of the others are kind of mid-range, so they're not too contrasting with that bobbin thread. So I feel like I can get away with the same bobbin thread throughout. And that'll keep the back looking a little more harmonious, I feel like. And I'm using Isacord 100% poly thread. It is my personal favorite. And I have it in both the top and the bobbin. And all I've done is knot my new color onto my old color and seem to have gotten it stuck where my knot is. There we go. So all I've done is unthreaded my needle at the front, pull my knot all the way through, snip it off, and rethread my needle. Move over so you can see a little bit. So it's just that simple to rethread with a new color. Not terribly difficult. If I was changing bobbins too, that would be a little bit more of a process, but in this case, not so bad. Looking at this now, I'm just going to see if I'm able to rewind my quilt about 2 inches. That sun is way up at the top, isn't it? My ruler's probably going to fall off when I do this. Maybe not. I'll just back up as far as I can with those clamps still in place. Now my sun is almost perfectly centered in my working area, and I'm good to go. My magnets are here. Dave's asking, where are your magnets? Where are your magnets? They're here. They've just rolled down the front a little bit is all, but they're fine. I want to leave my pin in place, which was my little note marker for the goose. I just have to turn it around so the head of it is not in the way of my sun. I'm going to do a tad bit of marking on this sun. Do you know, if I had really been thinking ahead, I could have showed you pictures of the first quilt, but I didn't. So you guys don't get to see what I'm doing. It'll all be a happy surprise for you. The original sun, I made kind of rays going out from the center, and I'm going to do the same with this one. I'm just putting a little bit less dense quilting in than I did in the original one. Flannel is kind of tricky because the marker doesn't want to show up on it very well. And all I'm doing is I've got a center point in the very center of the sun, and I'm going from that center point out to the points of my octagon, and then one line in between each one. Does that make sense? So I'm actually dividing it into 16, and I'm not being super scientific about it. I'm just going out to the 8 points and then eyeballing a line in between. I'm thinking. I'm just going to change my agenda a little bit. I was lining up my arcs. We're coming to the point of this central area. You can hardly see that, but I'm going to change them instead to where they come to the center of the star. I think that will look more natural. I don't know that you'll be able to see these marks at all. They're quite subtle. But you will see the quilting as it transpires. Go back over them. They almost disappear into the fiber of the flannel. They're so subtle. And the truth of the matter is, I could, as I quilt, just line up my ruler with the center point and those points around the perimeter, and I could probably get a decent star, but I know myself, or a decent sun. It's not really a star, although there's a star in the center. But I know myself, I will get distracted or kind of forget where I'm going, and I just find it far better to mark in advance and not get myself discombobulated. Wow, my marker just does not want to stay visible on the flannel. So I'm using an air erase marker, which disappears fairly quickly anyhow. But all I need is that suggestion of the line, so I'm persevering. Just need a little guideline. And of course there are going to be a few areas where it goes behind the mountains. Just wait till you see what I have in store for those mountains. You're gonna love it. Okay, I think, oh, there's one missing still, right on this corner. I think that's all of them. So I'm gonna start by going around the perimeter of the star. The sun. I keep calling it a star because there is a star right in the center of it. So this both gives me a line that I can travel in well, and it also anchors this area of the quilt, right? This sun is a huge component, and it will get that all, you know, stitched in place where no shifting can happen anymore. Going back to trim my threads. Now I am pulling this pin out for a second. Ask me how I learned this the hard way. It does not work to balance a ruler on top of a pin. It will shift and roll. So I'm just going to pull that out for half a second while I stitch this seam. And again, I'm needing to stitch on the on one side or the other of the seam allowance because it's pressed open. So of course I'm stitching on the coppery side because I have copper colored thread. That was the logical choice. You can see as I'm working my way around this octagon how handy the handle of this ruler is. I can shift my grip any number of ways. And that's what I love best about this particular ruler. My hand experiences far less fatigue because I can grip it so many different ways. Now what I'm going to do is just stitch in to the center of the star and then take a moment, I keep calling it a star, to the central star and take a moment then to finish this inner area. I'm going to do a secondary line around the center. I have not pre-marked this. I'm using certain points of my ruler and I'm eyeballing where the center of these points are. But I am using some of the marked lines on my ruler as a gauge and laying them on top of the existing seam allowance so that it's consistent, but I did not have to pre-mark it. Just one little way that you can save a bit of time. Now, what are we going to do inside this star, folks? I think we'll do stipple because we've done that in the navy so much, and I'll do it in a just little bit smaller scale. So I'm definitely under a 1/4 inch. with this little stipple. I do like to repeat a similar design element in several places throughout a quilt. I feel like it's unifying. So since I have a stipple elsewhere, it's a good choice. And I'm back at the corner where I began. Now on my initial design of this quilt, I did double lines between each of these rays. On this one, I think I still am going to do double ones. I'm going to quilt arcs between the rays. It's very... when rows of the arcs were to bump up against each other, I feel like it would be very distracting to have them right against each other because they would not necessarily match up, if that makes sense. And so I'm going to go ahead and put double lines between the sections of arcs. And here I need a double line, and they're just about 1/8 of an inch apart. Maybe a little more than that. And then I'm just arcing back and forth between them. I feel like I'm missing one of my marks. Let me just get a longer ruler here and check this out. No, that's right. And I'm just taking my time, arcing back and forth between, and using my edge stitching that I already did as my travel lines. And for my little 1/8 inch lines, I'm just trying to think ahead so that my arcs are always starting at the bottom. And so sometimes I do the 2 echo lines before the arcs and sometimes only 1. And that's the only difference, is I want to always be starting my arcs at the bottom. I did want subtle marking with the pen, but boy, this is really subtle. So subtle I can't find it sometimes. So because here I'm at the top and I don't want to start my arcs there, I'm going to go ahead and do the echo. Travel back just a hair and put my arcs in. So I've just had a kind of aha moment. I'm not sure whether it's a good or a bad aha moment, especially for Dana if she's listening. But I realized that on the original quilt, I did my arcs in the opposite directions. The convex part pointed toward the outside of the sun. And so in that respect, I've done it differently, but let's just call it unique. It is certainly going to be a different look than the original one had. And I didn't get my arcs done at the right moment, so I'm traveling back. And I'm probably going to stop talking now till I get the sun done, because I do need to think about this a little bit. I do love the look of this. And all my traveling, as I said, is just being done in the existing stitching in the ditch that I already did. I need to put that black fabric up again, Dave. How's it looking, guys? Does it look like a sun? We're getting there. We're about 3/4 of the way around the sun. Fastest trip around the sun I've ever taken. This kind of work here is one of the reasons that I wanted to use thread on the back of the quilt that blended with the backing and not to necessarily change up with every element of the quilt. Because this is involving, as you can see, a lot of small backtracks and kind of fiddliness, so there's going to be a certain amount of thread buildup. And you can imagine the backing is, you know, mostly that sort of robin's egg blue with the pine print, but if I had put copper thread in the bottom, that would really be showing and not that attractive necessarily on the back. But as it stands now, this will probably be pretty well invisible on the back, and I feel good about that because all these little backtracks are just not that beautiful. But it is creating really nice texture, I think, on the front of the quilt. And I'm really undecided whether I prefer the arcs going this way or the other. It's a very different look. Once again, I'm going to pull my pin out for a minute because I can't rest my ruler on it without having problems. There's probably a better way to mark that area, but I couldn't think of it offhand, so pin it was. You can see sometimes when I'm at the points of those geese, it just pulls when the hopper foot is just trying to get over that thick seam, like right there. So once again, big thank you to Dana for keeping it as manageable as possible. Flannel seams can really be a bugaboo. So I need to go all the way up to the next one. Do my little 1/8 inch echo. Travel around the point of my mountain. Also the easiest mountain crossing I've ever done in my life. Dave, the cheeky fellow, is asking, have you ever done one? So here now I'm left with one ray of the sun that does not yet have arcs, and I'm not going to travel all the way out to that. I'm just going to break thread for a second, and I actually need to do it in two areas. If you're seeing the close-up, it kind of straddles this little mountain peak. And so I need to do it even still. I need to break it into two more thread chunks. And I'm okay with that. So I am not tying and burying the threads for this quilt. I am just putting in a few lock stitches every time I stop. Again, with the fluffiness of the flannel and the thickness of the quilt overall, they will be very unobtrusive and unnoticeable. There's that one, and then a little one in here. And that's it. The sun is shining. Okay, let's put our reminder pin back in before we forget. What shall we do next? I think we'll go back and do more geese. There's going to be a few thread changes. It's faster to just change it than to endlessly deliberate over what's more efficient, isn't it? I'm going to come right in front of that, Dave, I think. So again, because I'm not changing the bobbin thread, it doesn't take very long. I just, at the back of my machine, knot the new color onto the old and pull it through the whole thread path of the machine, and we're good to go. Just a little side tip for you. When I am going to change thread color, before I walk around to the back of my machine, I always yank my thread out of the needle. Well, I say always, 99% of the time, because the other 1% of the time, I've come back to the front and started sewing, forgetting that the old color is still in there. When you're just making small thread shifts, like from a white to a cream, for example, it's all too easy to forget that, and then all of a sudden that knot hits your needle, the thread breaks, everything goes flying. Yeah. Alrighty. Well, while I get set up for my next geese, remember that these are live episodes on my Facebook page, and I would be so grateful if you would share them with your friends or guild members or fellow quilters that you think might enjoy them as well. And then the replays will be going up on YouTube. Usually within 24 hours, we get them loaded up there so that you can watch them again as often as you like. On YouTube, if you will like and subscribe, and particularly if you hit the little bell after you subscribe, you will then receive notifications of whenever new ones are uploaded, which can be helpful. Mr. Producer's asking me something, yes? And I've talked a few minutes already this morning about my new podcast, which I'm quite excited about. That has been fun to do. So each episode is interviewing a quilter, hearing their story, what quilting or crafting has come to mean in their life. And sometimes, you know, how it has built their business, or how it has been in their family for generations, or whatever the case may be. I have thoroughly enjoyed catching up with other quilters. So that can be found at wherever all your favorite podcasts are, but an easy way is just podcast.stitchedbysusan.com, and then all the various apps on which you can download it are all available there for choosing. There are a couple orders in which I could do this stitching. I chose to do the bottom of the goose first because often my goal is to get areas stabilized as quickly as I can. So rather than always work top down, you know, stitching the upper edge of the goose, then the arcs, and then its bottom edge, I actually opted to go right to the bottom edge and lock that in place. Does that make sense? So instead of continually pushing the fabric toward the bottom, I've just gone lower and fixed something in place. And now I'm trying a new path. I'm just meandering on the one side. We'll see how this works. Actually, let's go across the bottom because I was just talking about that. So now this goose area is stable right across the bottom. Oh yeah, this thread path will work fine too. More than one way to skin a cat, as my mother used to say, which is not a very nice word picture, but you get the idea. Keeping in mind that I want to end on the outside edge with my stipple, so I filled the inner edge first. There we go. So that's all I can do on this side. Yep, that's as far as I can go. So we'll lock that off, break thread, and go do some geese on the other side. For those of you in Canada, are you seeing our geese yet? We've been hearing them flying overhead for weeks already. Okay, so I'm back at my pin area so that I don't forget this little bit of stitching in the ditch that I needed to do here. So I'm lock stitching in the corner, doing my little stipple to make it blend together, and ending right where that ditch stitching left off before, and continuing that little line, just like that. Let's cut threads before we sew them down, those big tails. I'm going to pause for just a second and I'm going to run my machine forward those couple inches that we backtracked earlier so that I can get all the way to the bottom of this blue area, I hope. If not, I'll move it forward another inch. And I am not actually going to stitch in the ditch of this blue where it's against the mountains because I want to stitch on the white side, on the mountain side of the fabric. I think that viewed from the back of the quilt, it will delineate the edge of that mountain quite nicely. I don't honestly know if it makes a difference, but that's the way I chose, so that's what it's going to be for today. Because remember, my thread on the bottom is the same. So it's not really going to make a difference on the back. You're not going to like see a white edge of the mountain. It's still going to be a blue straight line. No matter which way I do it. I always think it's fun when you can get some sense of what the quilting is, and in this case, what the picture is. I really should be edge stitching this goose. Let's do that while we're near this corner. And here, part of this navy is unstitched with the stippling, because that's where the reach of my machine was in my last pass. So I'm just going to go back and fill that in before I continue on edge stitching my goose right here. And then I'm going to put my swoops in. And again, this is an area that has not been stippled. I just about have to have my nose in the quilt to see where the previous stitching is, I'll tell you. Wow. Okay. Stippling in that area is complete. Now over here we have no more geese left, we just have some stippling to do. So that will be easy peasy. I'm going to do this area and this one. So I'm just picking a space to lock stitch my thread and begin again. It is not going to show on either front or back of the quilt that there's an end to my stitching there. Similarly with ending it. I'm just picking a nice little corner of my tree here. And ending my thread pass. Grab my tails in the middle. Okay, one more small area and then we're golden. Our geese are well on their way north. Well, they're kind of flying east actually on this quilt, so I don't know where they're heading exactly. Maybe to Jeannie in New Brunswick. And you know what? I just see right here I've got one little goose that doesn't have swoops in it, and I have not cut my thread yet. So swoop and swoop. Presto. Now, let's see what we want to do next. I don't recall in my previous iteration of the quilt what I did. Are we seeing the quilt itself, Dave, or what camera are we on? Yes, that one. I don't know if you can see over on this side, there are goose colored areas, but they're randomly shaped, more like the sky. So then the question is, do I stipple them like the sky? And I think the answer is yes. It doesn't really matter what I did on the earlier quilt. This one does not have to be identical in any way. But that will extend quite a ways down below this mountain, which is not yet quilted. So I think we are going to do a couple of trees right here and then the mountain area. And at that point, we'll be probably 2/3 done the quilt. Don't get excited because we're not at 2/3 yet. But yes, I will take some questions and I'll try and talk and answer them while I try to get my tongue in gear while I change my thread to green. Okay, questions. Let's go. Or comments, whichever. Let me get a beverage while we do that. Dave, I want to thank you so much for being the camera person. No worries about little glitches. I'm so impressed at anyone being able to juggle more than one camera. I could not even manage one, never mind two. We've actually got 3 going all the time and 4 occasionally. So he is doing serious juggling. And my part of the juggling is they all have wires attached, and I'm working, you know, on a 12-foot machine and moving around. So my part of juggling is to try not to drive over the wires. So that's one of our reasons for wanting to upgrade cameras, so that we can do a different cabling system and have it perhaps all in a pipe on the top and then just drops down to the cameras. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Anyway, I passed on the thanks to Dave. Okay, that's hilarious. Dave thanked the wrong person for the nice comments. Thanks, Charmaine. He appreciates it.
And then I went to thank Charmaine, and my typo got it was a mess. So yes.
Cameras are Dave's strong suit, not necessarily keyboards. Sandy, looks great. Will be stunning. It is going to be pretty, I tell you. Wait till you see the mountains. Dana, whose quilt it is. This is fascinating watching you quilt it. Good. Eileen, the arcs add so much to the rays than if you just quilted straight rays extending from the center. Agreed. Agreed. It adds a whole bunch of texture and interest to it. Jeannie, all the Canada geese are back. Silly geese, it's freezing here. It's freezing so many places the last week or two. My goodness. Okay. Hopefully there's not too much of a gurgle going on when I take a sip. There's a new poll. Let's see what our poll is telling us. I will change thread while Dave's finding the poll. So I'm going to go with green now for the trees. And there are a number of shades in the trees, so I picked something lighter than the darkest ones, darker than the lightest ones, so that it will blend fairly well, I think, across them all. Why, oh why, did I leave my glasses on the other side of the quilt, though? I love quilting with my favorite buddy, my dog, cat, or chia pet. Just give me some music, or me and some houseplants, and Jack Reacher or any other good book in my headphones. So lots of you are book listeners. Me too, and or podcasts. I am really having trouble with my knots not wanting to slide through today, so I will have to have a look at my thread guide after this is over, because something is really holding up the knots there. Hang on a second while I struggle through this. This time I cannot seem to get it through at all. Nope, sure can't. Okay, we're rethreading. Well, you guys, it is totally live, isn't it? And this is how it goes sometimes. This is just how it goes sometimes. Can I see all the way over there? Okay, let's take a question and I can chat while I'm rethreading. Okay, Marge, I joined late, but I have understood that you have a different color thread in the bobbin than the top. Do you adjust your bobbin or top tension for this? I haven't had to today, Marge. My thinking was, because I'm working on a flannel quilt, it's flannel both top and bottom. There's quite a thick quilt sandwich, if you will, and that's a good place for that. There's a camouflage between the differences of thread color, and also they're not drastically different. So I don't have, red on one and white on the other, for example. The dark blue that I began with was by far the darkest of the threads. The others are very mid-range. The copper, the green, etc. The only one that is a little different will be the cream that I'm putting on the mountains. So we'll just see how it looks. I'll take a good look at that. And if the white and blue are not complementing each other, because I have mid-blue on the bottom, then I will change and put lighter on the bottom. But so far it's working good. I'm not seeing threads, through the stitching holes like you sometimes do if you have differing threads. It's fun to experiment from time to time. I usually do match my top and bottom threads, but not today. Okay, we're going to launch into the trees, which are going to be super fun. I'm going to just think here a minute of my quilting path, and maybe I'll show you guys how I often audition a design. Because I've quilted this quilt before and I'm doing the same trees, I kind of know where I'm going, but this would have been how I explored what I want to quilt. And it gives me a chance to think about my thread path too. Yeah, I'm thinking we'll shift cameras. Bear with us a second so that you can see a little better. So I've just got a very simple plexi sheet. It's about 18 inches by 24. And I have a a dry erase marker only that I'm drawing with. And my high-tech eraser is a piece of quilt batting. So here's my board. I've just got duct tape on the edges so that I can't inadvertently draw off the edge, and so that I always know which is the top. I never lay this markery side downwards on my quilt. Always my tape is on the top. So I can then practice whatever I want, to scale on my quilt surface, and then I can erase and try something different and so forth. So I'm looking for this kind of spruce tree looking idea. Let's see, do I want to start at the top? Yeah, that angle does not work well. And I'm just going to lay these little boughs in here. I wonder if I can quilt that backwards, so that I get up to the point and then come down the other side. Sure I can. Look at that. And then I will probably travel in this little seam and on to the next one. And that's basically going to be my trees. And each layer of branches will lay in the one that came before it. Does that make sense? I'm just going to try one other thread path. What happens, because it's easier to quilt from the top downwards to make those shapes. So what happens if I do one whole side of the tree? I'll show you what I mean. Like this. Travel. Yeah, no, not there. Travel this way. That should work, right? Is that making sense? Go up to that point again and do the same thing all the way down this tree. Now I will have to go back and do the very perimeter edge, and perhaps I should do that first. Yes, I will. Okay, let's get started. Sometimes it just takes longer to think and rethink it than to just get on and do it, and break thread if you need to. So let's start at this point, right here. Again, I'm going to be stitching in the ditch, but not quite in the ditch. I'm going to be slightly beside it because the seams are pressed open. And I'm going to stitch on the green side because I have green thread loaded. So I'm just a few thread widths into the green. Probably a 1/16 of an inch or thereabouts. So I'm going to stitch my little perimeter edge all the way to that top point. And then I will launch into my bows. I am quilting quite at arm's length here, but because this is not too detailed, I feel like I can get away with it. So I'm just winging it. I'm going to try and fit 5 bows in because I think an odd number always looks nice. There's number 5. I had to do a little backtracking to get the whole edge of that area edge stitched. Once again, I'm going to aim for 5 bows. 2. So 3 should be about in the middle. 4. 5. And once more, backtracking just a little. And not all these stitching lines line up. I don't know how to describe it with the previous ones, because sometimes I'm on one side of the green and sometimes I'm on the other. I'm not worrying about that too much. You will still see the indentation of that ditch stitching, so when you look at the quilt as a whole, your eye won't see that the stitching line jogs a little bit at some of these intersections. Your eye will just see a delineation of the tree as a whole and the areas of the tree. I think my thread path worked out pretty good. What do you think? And now I will endeavor to quilt a mirror image of what I did the first time. So now in that area of the tree, it's all edge stitched and the boughs are all stitched in. Lovely, I'm happy with that. I think what I'll do is I'll advance the quilt and I can finish this tree and do the little one that's beside it before I change my thread back to the mountain color. This quilt actually does a really good job of staying stable in my quilting area, partially because of the flannel. It sticks. The flannel sticks to the backing, so there's no shifting going on at all, which is really handy. I'm still using my magnets just to be sure, but it's doing very nicely. So you'll see as I advance, I think I can finish, maybe not quite. I thought I could finish both those trees. So a couple things I'm going to do here. On the far right hand side, which you can hardly see because of Lucy, I'm not going to baste it because there's only actually a few inches that aren't basted from that last partial advance, but I am going to pin it in place just to be sure that it does not shift on me. And I will come back next time I advance a little more and stitch that down. But on this side, I will stitch the basting along the trees because I'm fixing to complete the trees here. And I need that to be really stable. So once again, I'm just coaxing that flannel to stay in a nice straight edge. I'm coaxing my seam lines to stay in place and not push out in front of the hopper foot. And if you're not comfortable with my method of coaxing, then by all means, lay some pins in there every inch or two so that things can't shift on you. We're not going to be able to get quite the whole tree in, but that's okay because there's more trees down further. I'll have to load green thread again anyways, so it's okay. Let us put our stretchers back on. Oh, here comes the trick again of getting the flannel into my little bitty channel. I got it. Stretcher on. Grandpa's yardstick in place. We're good to go. And I don't actually need that on the far right side because I'm not even going to be quilting over there until I move the quilt again. I've kind of given it a tug just to make sure there's nothing creasing, wrinkling in the background, but I'm like on the backing, but I'm pretty confident that it's good to go. And as I go, I'm just casting an eye over the quilt over and over again. You wouldn't believe how easy it is to miss a little area, so it pays to double check. I am going to put a magnet right where I'm working. I want to be sure that this bottom edge of the quilt is not pulling up as I'm quilting details into it. I'm going to start at the top of this dark green area. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to go quilt the perimeter of the green first. I reserve the right to change my mind. Maybe even several times. Here we have a really thick seam, and I did not notice that before. I'd have been pounding that one. So I'm just getting my fingers in there and manhandling it a little bit. We made it. Often just slowing down is the ticket. Come on, Lucy, you can do it. Got it. Now, in order to start our bows, I started in the top peak. I'm just going to go ahead and travel up there. I just traveled right in my previous stitching line. So it's all good. So once again, I'm going to aim for 5 bows down each side. Number 3 is about in the middle. Number 4. And number 5 sweeps way out to the corner. In case there are people interested in making this design, maybe Dana would like to chime in on the comments, but I believe that all these fabrics are Janet's as well. Okay, what have I just done? I'm supposed to be up at that point. See, I'm talking and not thinking. I'm positive, actually. All these flannel fabrics are part of Janet Nesbitt's collections too, and her fabrics are released through Henry Glass. They are a beautiful quality of flannel. Really luxurious and thick. And so many interesting prints. Just trying to get my thoughts in gear here. How did I get back up to that point on the first section? I literally can't remember, so we're just going to start at the top again. For this one, we'll come and put maybe just 3 little bow sections in this bottom one. And since it is so tiny, I'm just going to go ahead and do the flip side of it while I'm here. Okay, that's done. So once again, we'll start at that top point and do the mirroring side. Lock stitches and endeavor to do a mirror image of what we did before. And as you can see, this is certainly not highly complex quilting, but it sure does add character to these trees. And it just makes them look like trees. And there we are. That tree is finished. Now my little tree off to the side, I'm going to kind of reverse the process and quilt the right-hand side of it first. Again, no right and wrong way. But in this case, as you can see, the tree is kind of extends beyond the edge of the quilt. And so if I do the right-hand side first, I feel like I will be able to better mirror what's quilted on one side in order to achieve that similar bows on the other side and making them look like they would have extended off the edge. Does that make sense? You'll see as I go. So I'm doing the perimeter to work my way to the top. All the way to the tippy top. And now we'll come back down with the bows. I think all my life I've lived in areas where there were a lot of pine or spruce trees, and this sweeping look is so familiar to me. Now I realize I'm not quite at the bottom of the tree, but I cannot do that whole next strip without bumping up against the front rail of my quilt, and so I'm just going to break thread here, and when I do my other trees in the interior of the quilt, I will come back and complete this one. So let's stitch up this outside edge. We only have this short area. I'm bumping into the tripod there. See, this is how it goes. The tripods and Lucy, my quilting machine, have this little dance going on. So now I will do my best to mirror what's being done on the other side and to make it look like my boughs are extending off the quilt. And so now we would be stitching up this next dividing line. One, two, 3, 4, and 5. And that's it. Those trees are quilted. Okay, now we are going to undo everything, back up a little bit, and the mountain is next. How long have we been, Dave? We must be at about the 2-hour mark, yes? So we are at the 2-hour mark. I think what we'll do maybe is take about a 5-minute intermission. That way if you need to grab a bite to eat or something to drink, it's a good pause to do it in. And I will change the thread over to the cream for the mountain, and when we come back we will launch on the mountain. And I do encourage you to come back because you're going to be astonished. This is my favorite part of the quilt. The mountain's right here and creating some texture going on there. Here we are. So give us just 5 or so minutes for a quick break. You guys take a bathroom break too and fill up your coffee mug, and I will see you back here in 5 minutes. We won't close it out. We'll just leave it going and put some pretty music on for you, and be back in just a few minutes. See you then. Well, hello and welcome back, and I'm still getting my act together here. Is the sound on, Dave? We're all good to go? Good-o. Okay. So one of the things I did was fire up my computer again. It had gone to sleep thinking I was never going to get done. And so I fired up my computer, and I need to refer to it looking at these mountains just because it worked out so well on the last quilt that I did that I want to kind of do a similar idea. And I was trying to create, you know, this texture of there are areas of the mountain that are smooth and windswept, and there are areas that are craggy and rough and, you know, snow's been falling, there's been an avalanche, whatever. So I was trying to create this contrast in texture going on. So what I actually did is alternated these different fabrics with a matchstick quilting in every second one, and in the ones between kind of a stylized feather. So that's what I'm going to do again. And the reason my computer is helpful is because I can determine which ones I did, because I worked out the ones that overlap and are beside each other and so forth. So I'm going to have a look at my picture here, and I'm going to mark the mountain. If I can make my picture just a little smaller, where I can see the whole thing. I'm going to go ahead and mark the areas of the mountain that have the feather, and then I'll know which ones to quilt the feather in. So it's this one. Yes, let me move Lucy so you guys can see. I don't know that you can honestly see what I'm doing. I'm just using my little air erasable pen again and just very lightly marking the areas that I want to put feathers in. This one, this one, this one. And of course it comes down the other side. And then this one as well. So that leaves this one here. I think that does it. Just looking carefully over the whole thing. All right. So I'm going to refer to this picture, not because there's not two ways to do it. There's several ways you could do it, but because it worked out so well that I thought I'm just going to do the same thing again and not try and reinvent that particular wheel. So we're going to start with a matchstick one, and I need to first change my thread. So remember my trusty tip, pull the thread out of the needle so that I don't inadvertently begin sewing with the wrong one. So pardon me while I'm out of camera, changing the thread. And I'm just keeping all my spools of thread handy. I will come back to all of them once or twice more during the course of this quilt. So while I'm doing this, I'll chat a little more. I think I've introduced you all a couple times today, but in case you're new to my new podcast, which is called Measure Twice, Cut Once, in which I interview quilters, and in future there will be other crafters as well, and just hear their stories and what their craft has meant to them and in their life, and possibly even in their therapy. And so that can be found, the easiest way to find it is at podcast.stitchedbysusan.com, and from there you can pick your favorite app for downloading them. I'd absolutely love if you would leave me a review or some feedback on the podcast. I'm having the hardest time with my knots getting tangled up in my little intermittent thread dealy here. Pretty sure there's something I need to be changing there, because it should not be this difficult at all. There we go. Come on through. Okay, let's give that a try. So white thread coming on through. So further, we're on my Facebook page right now. If you have other quilting friends that you think would be interested in these live and unscripted episodes, I'd love if you would share. At any time during the episode, you can share with your friends or share the link afterwards. And then within 24 hours or so, we will upload a replay to YouTube so that you can watch it again as often as you like. Alrighty, I'm going to put my magnets on the front of the quilt. I've backed it up a little bit from where we were quilting the trees, so my sides are fairly well stabilized at this point. I think that's all I need there. I'm going to go ahead and stitch the whole top edge of the mountain. in the ditch, just to get that, again, stabilizing a large area so that things can't shift while I'm working. And once again, Dana, you did a great job of, Dana is the client to whom this quilt belongs, did a great job of pressing the seams open and reducing some of that bulk that can be such a problem with flannel quilts. So if you decide to make this quilt in the future, consider that. I don't have the pattern in front of me, so I'm not sure what the instructions are in there in terms of pressing, but I recommend pressing the seams open just to reduce that crazy bulk. In my newsletter on Sunday, I posted a link to the pattern booklet for sale. It is such a unique and charming design. It's by Janet Nesbitt of One Sister Designs, and so are the fabrics. All the fabrics represented in this flannel one are of her design too. So I'm just stitching slightly off center of the seams. Because they're pressed open, I don't want to go right down the seam. That would only catch the stitching threads. So I'm stitching just on the white side of these seams. Just a couple threads width, less than a 1/16 of an inch. Now I did not stitch in the ditch between all of these lines within the mountain. I let the difference in texture be the delineating factor. So this upper one here is going to have, there we are. It is going to have the matchstick quilting. And I do this freehand. You certainly could do it with a ruler too. I just find this relatively easy to do for vertical lines, so I just do it freehand. And my lines are a little less than a hopper foot width apart. Usually I sail through these matchsticks, but I'm taking it easy because of the seam allowances. There is still a certain amount of bulk there. And I don't want to be zooming along and then finding that, oh, it's pushed way out in front of me because I hit a seam allowance, came up against a seam allowance, so, or a seam intersection. So I'm just taking it easy. And of course, every time I do see a seam, a vertical seam, I can kind of gauge the straightness of my stitching as well. But in my experience, machines want to go straight forwards and back and straight side to side. You have to deflect them to make them sort of turn corners or angle. So this straight line stitching is not nearly as intimidating as it seems. Just get the machine going and gently nudge it in the direction you want to go, and it pretty much wants to go straight. And here I see a seam that's going to give me a little grief, so I'll just coax it into place. So the area that I'm stitching is exactly what is done in this one particular fabric. So I don't have to worry about trying to figure out what's where. I'm just doing what's in this one fabric. And my goal is to make them alternate so that there's contrast one area against another. So again, I just referred to my picture, and I actually did this matchstick all the way through this next peak on the top edge. And this is kind of what I was referring to when I said I had previously, you know, on that earlier quilt, worked out what to put where so that I got the best level of contrast between areas of stitching. So I played around with, you know, should I do matchsticks here or should I do feathers here? Because they don't perfectly alternate in terms of fabric. So I just played around with that a little bit. Once again, I'm going to look at my picture, make sure I got this right. In this case, I am also going to do the matchstick on the part that's just to my right. So I'm just going to travel. Even though I'm not stitching in the ditch on all those lines, I'm going to go ahead and travel along that one line just to get to this quilting area. And there we are. We have mountain peaks. Okay, so our next layer is feathers, but I saw this as I was finishing my outlining. I do have this little triangle in the bottom, which is part of this fabric. You can see where I am, just in the corner of your camera there. This little tiny triangle needs the, my words fail me, the little matchstick quilting. That's what I'm trying to say. I want the same texture to be in this little triangle. There we go. And now comes the fun part. We're going to quilt some feathers. Now these are going to be quite stylized feathers. And just as a little side note, I'm sitting here looking really closely at my white stitching and in particular my corners, both my rounded corners and any points where I pivoted, to see if my blue background thread is showing through, and happily it is not. So that's a good thing. I'm going to advance the quilt just a hair because I can't reach the bottom of that very next segment where I want to lay a feather. I think that will be enough. Let's just see. Not quite. Look at that. I'm half an inch short. Shift my magnets a bit. Roll the quilt a bit more. That should do it. Using my magnets to just make sure things are taut. Watching my seam lines to make sure that they're straight along this front edge, keeping nice and level. Okay, on to the feathers. You certainly could draw these in with a marker beforehand. Me being me, I'm not going to. I'm going to wing it. But if you wanted to plan the placement in advance, for example, you certainly could. The beauty of feathers of many kinds, and especially these, is that you can stretch them to fit. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Sorry, when I hit a certain speed, it makes my plate really rattle. There is one feathered texture. So I'm looking back at my pictures of my quilt, and do we have a close-up, Dave, of where my hopper foot is? Something I'm going to show you. This is an example of changing midstream. Can you see this seam right here? This one right up here? They're really protruding a little bit because I've stitched on both sides of them, but not right on them. So I'm actually going to change my plan, and I am going to drop in a ditch stitch between every one of these white areas because I don't like that. And when I release the quilt off the tension of the rails, that's going to be emphasized even more. And I don't want those areas to be popping up. That catches your eye. It's the first thing you see instead of the texture. So I'm just going to go back and lay in a line of stitching along this stitch, forcing those little seam allowances to lay down, especially where the intersections are thick. Much better. I'm much more happy with that. And that is the sort of thing that your little plexiglass audition board cannot tell you. You know, it's only two-dimensional. So sometimes you just have to begin quilting, and you just don't know until you start. So we'll just go ahead and buzz through as many of these as we can do in a continuous line and get all these edges stitched down nicely. And I know it was really difficult to work with these flannels and get smooth intersections. So I'm not sweating it when they aren't exactly meeting up. I don't worry about it. I just try and make as straight a stitching line as I can and call it good. Okay, this little gray section has the match sticking again. So let's go do that and work our way back to the other side. Are you starting to be able to see that difference in texture, that contrast that I was hoping to achieve? Excellent. See if I can get my camera in a good view there so you can see a couple of those textures. There we go. Doesn't that look nice? I'm so pleased. So pleased. Okay. let's see if we can do a couple other feather areas. If I think this through correctly, I could go around the perimeter of this block and then start the feather right at this point. That's where I want to begin it. So let's ditch stitch that perimeter first. Oh, and we just ran out of bobbin thread. Let's change that before we launch into the feathers. Whoopsie. So again, my usual method for the end of bobbin, I don't have my machine counting and trying to determine when I'm low. Certainly that is an option on many machines, but I just choose to let it run out, and then I back up to the last point that I judge is good for splicing. So in this case, it's easy. It's right at this point where I already have some several stitches right on top of the other to hold it secure anyways. And you can see my blue bobbin thread as I'm undoing this, but in fact it is not showing through at all in my stitching. So I'm pleased about that. Drop my little seam ripper there so I can remember exactly where I was. And again, because I knew we were going to have so much time already invested in this quilt, I went ahead and preloaded all my bobbins in preparation for this morning, so I can just pop a new one in. Okay, and back to where my little seam ripper marks the spot. Few good lock stitches in there. Okay, this oddly shaped place is going to give you a really good idea of how I can manhandle these feathers into fitting and filling this area. And honestly, this was the majority of the reason why I chose such a whimsical feather. I'll have to wait to clip those threads till I'm not stitched right there. Get my tails out of the way. These particular feathers lend themselves so well to twisting and turning into funny spaces like this one. We got it in there. Okay. This gray area here is also a feather, am I right? I am right. I'm just trying to see where... No, I'm wrong. That gray area is a matchstick, and this creamy one, I'm not sure how much of my finger you're seeing, is a feather. So let's go ahead and do the feather first, I believe. Let me just make sure I can reach all the parts of it. Yes, no problem. And remember, I have, you can see a bit on the camera, I did the edge stitching around the mountain, so this area is already anchored fairly well, even though I have not yet sewn the geese. This cannot be shifting. My backing underneath will be held in place. I'm just looking at all the thread path that I can save or make, you know, in one pass is what I'm doing here. That's what the pause is all about. Looking ahead, how can I save thread angles? So I'm going to go around this central kind of tan colored one first. I did not account for that in my machine spacing. I cannot quite reach the tip of it. Okay, and we're back at the beginning. So can you see this funny little area down here? It extends down below just a bit. You can kind of see where my finger is. So I'm just going to stretch my first feather to fit that oddish shape. And it's very odd when it's there by itself, but as soon as I start adding more feathers in, it all looks good. While I'm here, I'll just edge stitch this little area. And now we need to make some decisions. I could forward and do more of the mountains, or I could do the geese on the right-hand side. I think we'll go ahead and go forward and do more of the mountains. I'll just take a break and break my thread right here where I am now, and do some basting on the right-hand side, because I'm going to do a full advance now. Remember, I did that partial one earlier, so I dropped a few pins in there to hold things stable, but now I want to get it really fixed in place. So let's advance. Let's get that stitched down so we don't get any shifting going on. About there. So while I baste, I'm just going to do a quick recap for those who might be just popping in at the moment. I'm working on a custom project today, but it is still just a one-day project. The quilt pattern is The Mountains Are Calling by Janet Nesbitt. It is a flannel quilt with a flannel backing. And I'm doing some fairly simple, but I hope a bit artistic quilting on it. So it's not highly intricate. It just really plays with the design of the quilt. So highlighting the trees, the mountains, etc. I'll be finishing, or mostly finishing, this project today. Certainly I will finish all the different areas so you've had a sampling of all of it. And then we'll be loading it on YouTube so that the replays are available there to watch at your leisure. And this is not a lesson per se. I'm just kind of talking through my thought processes and why I'm doing what I'm doing as I go. So you notice that I basted with the white on top, and still I have my blue in the bottom, and the rest of my quilt so far I had basted with the dark blue. I'm not too worried about that. I guess my client will let me know if she is, but here's my rationale. It's all going inside that binding seam anyways, so I didn't change my thread just to do the basting. I'm going to flip the process of what I did earlier and just put a couple pins on the right, because a good chunk of that side, sorry, on the left, your other right, a good chunk of that is already basted, and I'm just going to drop a couple pins in there to make sure it doesn't shift. And we'll catch it with our next advance. I'm all about saving myself time. Okay, let's look at our picture again. Make sure we're on the right track for what things we're quilting, where. Even though I marked them with my trusty marker, it is, again, disappearing on me like crazy. So this tannish area here is going to get a feather in it. And I felt like it was a little too wide to use. You can kind of see it. Dave's going to change cameras for you. in my earlier feather petals, I kind of used one side of the seam as the spine and just laid, you know, half one side of a row of feathers on there. But this one I felt like is a bit wide for that. So I'm actually going to just sketch. Let me see if chalk will work better. I'm going to sketch a kind of spine idea. Nope. Well, you guys won't be able to see this, but I can see the idea, and that's really all I need. I'm just kind of doing a simple S curve, and that's what I'm going to use as my visual spine. I'm not actually going to quilt that line. That's just what I'm going to lay my feathers upon, and I'm going to go to the right and to the left with the feathers. So these ones at the base will be really tiny. And I just wonder if I shouldn't. I think I will. I'll start at this top end and anchor this area by stitching in the ditch all the way down it. We want to be confident that that will not shift when we're stitching our feather. Quickly do the bottom and back to the beginning of my feather. Okay, so I can see my little spine. I'm sure you can't, but trust me, it's there. And I'm going to basically alternate my feathers from side to side on that spine. Stretching them, manipulating them to fill up all the area of this sort of tan colored fabric. Taking my time because, again, you can probably hear it. I keep going over these really layers of fabric, and they are thick. I know this is weird for you guys, but I'm turning my light on for just a moment so I can see where to put these feathers. You're very important to me, but the happiness of my client is even more important. There it is. So you'll probably have to wait for photographs to be able to see that properly, but it looks pretty sharp. Okay, so that feather is in. Now this next little area then will be our matchstick. So I'm just reviewing matchstick, 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 matchstick. Yes, I can do a whole line of this all the way across. So let's start on the right hand side doing some ditch stitching. Nope, take that back. Probably making you guys dizzy, whizzing all around the quilt top. I just see a shorter path. That's the way my brain goes, or a more efficient path. It's not really shorter. It's all got to be covered at some point. So what I'm thinking, kind of big picture for the rest of today, I see that this is going to take a fair bit more time. So I'll finish this chunk of mountains, and then you've got a good sense of how that's happening. Then I'm going to go back and do some more geese so that I'm down into the last sort of section of the quilt, the last pass. And then there's one more area and type of quilting, and that is the grass and the fox that are at the bottom. So I'll get myself into that area and quilt some of that for you. And at that point, I'll probably be done live for today, because all the rest then will just be repeating, you know, doing more of this mountain, more of the trees, more of the geese, etc. How does that sound? So let me know in the chat window. It's been kind of quiet today, but I'd love to hear if this is helpful, if it's giving you ideas, if it's encouraging you in, you know, designing as you go. How you feel about it? Let me know. As soon as I'm done this matchstick area, I will stop for a minute and take your comments and or questions. I call this matchsticking. I think really true matchstick quilting is much finer even than this. You know, more like 1/8 of an inch or even 1/16. However, for lack of a better word, that's what I'm calling this. And this is something that I love to quilt because it does make such a close and flat texture and contrasts with so many other things well. But you can really play with it in terms of spacing. Just going to pause and clip threads here. Time for some comments. And a little sip for me. Move Lucy to the side. Dana, yes, all Janet's Flannel 4 series, with the exception of the animal ground design. That is also Janet's, but an earlier grouping which she's out of. Thanks to the internet, my husband found some of this flannel at a shop outside Yellowstone. It's one of my favorite prints on the original quilt. That's awesome. Isn't the internet a wonderful thing for finding out of print designs? Sam, it's been good listening to you go. I'm super impressed with your ability to talk and quilt at the same time. Well, as you notice, that does not always work. Sometimes the gears slip a little bit, but I try. Okay. Boy, you guys are quiet this afternoon. Alrighty. Let's go back and do... I think we've covered the mountain fairly well. I'm going to go back and lay down a few more geese and then go down and baste all the way to the bottom of the quilt and do that grass. I feel like we've nearly getting close to reaching our limit of how much talking and stitching we can do without a break. So what I'm going to do is start basting down this left side and leave my needle down when I advance. A little bit. Nope, I'm going to change my mind, which I've done before, haven't I? Because I realize I've got geese quite a bit up at the top on the right hand side that have not yet been quilted. So let's back it up a little bit and get to those little pesky geese. Okay, here we are. I will only be working on the right, so I'll just clap my magnet on the right hand side. It is already basted. I've given a good tug to my backing fabric, my quilt as a whole, to make sure there's no wrinkles across. And honestly, because of all my mountain peaks now, this is all secured way down to in here. And my basting as well. So everything's pretty well anchored and secure. So let's see what we would like our thread path to be. Oh, gosh. Just about started quilting the blue with white thread. So bear with me a sec while I get my blue thread back on. The good news is we'd have seen that right away, wouldn't we? And I'm using, surprisingly, this, the thread is called teal. It's not a turquoisey teal at all. It's a quite blue teal. But it's actually one of my favorite threads. It blends with so very many dark blues. Quite happily. They play in the playground happily together. Let's see if I can struggle with that knot again. Yes, I can. A little better. Okay, we're back to blue thread. If I park it over the white, it'll make it easy to thread my needle. Lovely. And I'm kind of quilting at arm's length, but this is not complex quilting, so I'm going to do it. If I could pull my bobbin thread up, it would make things so much better. There we go. Anchor it in place. I'm just double checking where I have stippled for sure, so I am sure to catch all those areas and get them quilted. My goal was to end up right at the point of this goose, and here I am. I'm going to pause for just a sec. I don't have my stretcher on the right hand side here, and I'm going to put that on. I can feel that it's not firmly anchored there. There we go. That will help. Much better. You probably can't see that in the camera, but basically my ruler plate caught on my little edge stretcher. And I think I caught it in time that I didn't get a funny bunch of stitching, but what I needed to do is put my little yardstick in there to hold that up out of the way. Yeah, the stitching's pretty funny. I take that back. Sadly, I was right in the middle of one of those arcs, and so it now has some square angles. So we'll just quickly redo that. And it will take a second, and I'm going to have to turn the light on so I can see enough to undo it. Remember, this is live and unscripted, and this is how it goes. There's not a lot of things that I undo when it's going to be compensated for by texture, or when it's exactly matching thread and doesn't really show up. I chalk it up to experience. But in this case, I feel like the arc of that goose having a funny angle is not ideal. So let's not leave that in there. And there's where I have my few stitches right on top of another. Any of you who are new, if you hear the clatter of me putting away my tools, I have a blue Solo cup. It lives on a peg at the top of my machine. And it's where all my little thread ends go, and also my tools. And I'm just going to lower the quilt a little bit. That real vibration that you're seeing is because it's lifted quite far off the quilting bed. So if I lower it a bit, we'll get less vibration going on. Much better. Turn the light off for you again. Flip my threads. Oh, I have threads everywhere. Let's get them all. I've ended up in the middle of this pair of geese, if you will. So I'm just going to break thread and go back out to the edge and try and get a better thread path established. When you are quilting on a really dark background like this and it's difficult to see your thread path, usually the best thing to tweak is your light source. So you've seen me flip the light on and off when I need to undo some stitching so that I can see the thread, but in fact I can actually see where I've stitched better if I have that bright light off and I have some side light shining in from my window. I recently did a quilt. It was just an edge-to-edge quilting design. It wasn't custom, but the fabrics were just the right amount of print and just the right color that I could not see where I was quilting. And what I finally did is got a floor lamp and with kind of an adjustable gooseneck top, and I adjusted it so hard that it was just shedding light right sideways across my quilt, and I turned off all the other lights in the room. And amazingly, that really helped. And basically what I was doing was creating huge shadows, and that enabled me to see my quilting path. So there's a little tip for you when you're quilting on dark fabrics. Mess with the light, and sometimes creating shadows is better than creating more excellent light. My thread. I'm not sure what happened there. But suddenly it was flying free. Sometimes when that happens, I always check back over my thread path, because sometimes when that happens, of course, it breaks with a snap and your thread can kind of boomerang back and come out of its various hooks and things that it should be traveling through. So I always take a sec to just cast my eye over my thread path when that does happen. Make sure everything's in its place. Now the bobbin thread never even broke, and I'm not going to bother to cut it and pull it up because I'm in the basting perimeter area anyway. So I'm just going to leave that where it is. Sorry about that vibration. It's like having a vibration in your car at certain speeds when I hit just a certain speed. I think I can get one more row in. I can. Yay! Alrighty, we will kneel down there. Actually, I think I will go ahead and break thread here and start basting on the other side because it's a little further behind. And I think we will attempt to baste right to the bottom. How are we doing for time, Dave? Mr. Producer, sir. Well, if you heard that great thump, I just knocked my laptop on the floor. Whoops. Okay, how are you guys feeling for time? Maybe chime in a little bit because I can shorten this up and go right on to the grasses, although my preference would be to quilt some more trees because there's quite a large area here that would be left undone to go down and baste all the way at the bottom. Does that make sense? So if you guys are still good for time, or if you're just willing to come back and watch it later, I'm going to keep quilting regardless, so I'll get one stretch basted here and I'll start on the trees and you guys can let me know kind of what your feeling is about that. Because the only area that you have not, the type of quilting you've not seen yet is the grasses at the bottom. And I do have quite a fun idea for that. Okay, let's take a minute and get our stretchers on both sides. Left side done, and this side, this time, I remembered the yardstick, so that's a plus. Flannel being the stretchy thing that it is, I'm seeing just the tiniest inkling of it wanting to push down on the outer perimeter, especially on this right-hand side, like it's just a little stretched along the edge. So I am taking a minute to pin it really securely where I want it to be. I don't want any of those seam lines shifting out of place. I don't want the geese to look like they lost their place in line. That would never do. Okay, so let's see how you're feeling about pressing on with our quilting. On this one? Yep. not in any camera, Dave, but oh well. A few of you are willing to stay for the grass and keep going. So I think I will. Like I'm going to keep quilting this afternoon anyhow, so I'll go ahead and just keep on going live. So I'll do another segment of trees, and honestly we're nearing the end of the geese. There are only a few on the other side. But basically I want to get enough trees done that I've only got one pass width showing here before I baste the bottom edge, if that makes sense. So let's see where we're at in our tree. We need green thread. I'm just looking, ladies. I do still have blue. Remember there was these odd blue areas in here that I had decided I'm going to stipple. There aren't any geese there. They extend upwards quite a ways into the quilt, so I'm going to leave that till later because everything there is held in place, right? I've quilted all the surrounding areas. So I'll come back and fill in those little bits of things later on. How's the back of my head looking? Is it a bad hair day? Is there a lot of gray back there? Okay. So I'm curious, are any of you inspired to go out and make this quilt? I was starting to talk about earlier my idea for it. I don't know if it's a good idea or even if I'll get it done. But I would love to try this quilt in more contemporary fabrics. Not flannel to begin with. I don't love sewing flannel. I like sleeping under it, but I don't like sewing it. But I would love to try it in more contemporary fabrics and maybe brighter colors and just see, I don't know, I love the piney greens. It just would be an interesting experiment to see what the different look would be. Alrighty, I have done the outside edge of this area of the tree. So I'm going right up to the tippy top of this particular bough. See if I can get my needle thread pulled under the hopper foot. There we go. Once again, I'm quilting at arm's length, but needs must. And I left my ruler. Fetch it. Yes, let us take a moment and insert Grandpa's yardstick. He never knew what it would be used for when he had it in his little hardware store. Let me just think a sec how I'm going to get around this without stopping. If I go to the top of this point, do my petals down and back up, I think I can do it all in one pass, the rest of this tree. I think I can. So I have to do my little doohickeys here, my little boughs. I have to reverse them and try and mirror image them. There we go. Now I have not quilted the bottom rim of the tree, so I'm going to quick go do that and just travel back on that line. All the way across to the right. Backtracking over some earlier stitching, but I think that looks all right. And there we have it. One more pine tree planted in the forest. tree. This one we should be able to do all in one fell swoop, I think. See if I remember correctly how to get around it. Probably not. It's just my little mental puzzle going on. I have to keep myself amused while I quilt. See, and I already went to the wrong place. I totally did. Ah, well. One, two, three. I forgot to zigzag up the outside of the tree is what I forgot to do. Do that top sweeping bough afterwards. Now I'm at the wrong place really to be starting my tree. So that little oopsie of forgetting to zigzag has cost me 2 or 3 thread breaks. Oh my goodness. Imagine. I do remember early on, whenever I worked on a custom project, particularly, being so worried, you know, about thread breaks. Is this the right way? Is this the most efficient way? And the truth of the matter is it doesn't really matter. I mean, I suppose if you're knotting and burying off every single set, it costs you a little bit more time, but you certainly don't have to tie yourself in knots. Sorry, I didn't mean to be punny. But you certainly don't have to tie yourself in knots making fewer thread breaks. Like, it's just not a big deal. You know, this tree is going to be unique. It's going to have 6 boughs on one side. I didn't get my spacing very good, so I tucked another one in because I thought it would be just too broad a span. He just grew a wee bit lopsided. Not the perfect Christmas tree. Possibly it's a Bob Ross tree. Just put a little bough in there. Put a happy little bough in it. Okay. I feel like if I advanced a little more, I could do the next tree all in one fell swoop too. Let's see if I can do it without undoing my stretchers. I might have that many inches of leeway. My yardsticks will fall off. I did it. And we are seeing the end of the quilt, people. Sure, I'll take some comments if there are some there. Yep. This is looking pretty slick. Linda's still watching? Oh, okay. We're seeing conversations. Okay. Okay, we see the time in the UK. Linda's watching way into the evening. Stitched by Susan or Netflix. That's a hard one. Okay, so funny. So funny. Susan all the way. It's informative and an education. You know, and you get to comment on my hair and stuff like that. Well, you guys are about to see Alive and Unscripted first. So I'm finally seeing the edge of my quilt at the front end here. And I'm realizing I'm actually running out of backing. And of course a certain small amount is taken up in my red snapper system because it takes a little bit for the curve over the little underlying peg. So what I'm going to end up doing is very loosely basting this bottom edge, filling in as much grass as I can, and I will end up unloading the quilt, taking it off and putting it sideways where I can quilt right to the edge of that backing area. And I think I'll be able to make it. It's gonna be like, where's my finger? There it is, this close. So yeah, these are the things that happen sometimes when you're on camera. That's the thing that has happened today. And I probably could at the top have, you know, pushed it up just a little more in my loading process. I didn't really realize that I was, you know, going to be cutting it that close, or I certainly would have. But I think we'll be all right. I'm just going to have to take my red snappers off and turn it sideways in order to complete it. And that's not the end of the world. I can do that. Can you see the fox's little tail coming here? He's got a little fluffy tail. This time I'm determined to remember zigzag up the outside of the tree. That's the efficient way to get around it. Just a wee bit of backtracking here alongside this other tree that's in behind. So little tiny areas like the one I just am passing, the triangle that has the foxy fabric in. Those are the sorts of things that I'll take a few minutes to go back on after, you know, after we're off camera and, you know, fill in a little bit of the grassy type quilting area will be in there. There's a couple little white mountain areas. And of course the sky, which we already talked about, which kind of feeds in and behind the trees and mountains, which takes a little time but is not at all difficult to just go back afterwards and fill in those areas with the appropriate texture and color of thread. Why is this not working? I was supposed to stay up at that point. You know what? I'm just going back there. Need to come all the way down the left side, Susan. bright side, this time I remembered to build that tree with the right number of sweeping boughs. Someone has a question. Let's see it. I can't see it. There we go. Mickey, do you fill in the other areas before you quilt it sideways? I probably will. I'll probably fill in absolutely everything that I can do because it's only going to be that tiny grassy area on that one. Well, it will become the side, what is now the bottom. So I'll try and get everything done, but I will certainly take that opportunity when I'm unloading it anyways to have cast a really good eye over it and make sure that everything is covered. That's always the trick with a quilt like this. There's no way to be systematic about it because there's not any repeating blocks. So you just have to go back and pay attention to make sure nothing has been missed. Talk my way through this. Think out loud. Making a little detour because I saw this tiny area that is not edge stitched. So I just made the point of my tree go right there. Since it's a Bob Ross type quilt, it's my little tree. I can put a happy little bough anywhere I like. Okay, looking at all my trees, what shall I do next? I think that I can accomplish this next tree over. I just need to back up my quilt about an inch. I can't quite reach to the top of it, but I think I can accomplish it all in one fell swoop too. Okay. You may not be able to see them, but I do still have my magnets on the front of the quilt. And it gets really important the closer to the bottom of the quilt that you get because it's lighter weight and there's less resistance and it wants to pull up as you're quilting down areas. That fabric wants to be pulling up, so it's really important to either go ahead and take the time to baste that right away or keep those magnets or a row of pins or something on there to anchor that quilt top. It's floating, but you can't really let it float free, or it'll go places you don't want it to go. Here's another little tiny area of sky. Do you see that I'm just going past? That I will have to remember to come back and put just a dab of meandering in with my blue thread. So those are the sorts of details that do take a little bit of time. And you maybe don't even notice them when they're done, but you sure notice them if they're not done. Or I would. Maybe that's just me. But I would totally see that in a quilt if there were little areas that were missing a texture that they ought to have. That tree is finished. I feel like these next couple of trees I could do in one swoop, but I've got to get that bottom edge firmly fixed first. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take all my magnets and stretchers and things off, advance my quilt, and I'm just going to put a loose, and by loose I mean a large stitch base that will be easy to undo across that bottom edge, but very secure so that it can't shift at all, because eventually I'm going to be literally unloading the quilt and shifting it, and I want everything to stay in place very securely. So this edge I mentioned earlier has the multiple seams of the geese, and of course flannel has a fair bit of give to it, and I could see that those seams were wanting to migrate downwards. Migrate in geese, too funny. Anyways, so I did take the time to put a whole bunch of pins in there where that was trying to happen, because that helps me to evenly disperse any extra bulk that might be in there. And flannel, you know, which on the one hand always wants to stretch, that's the bad thing about it, but the good thing about it is it's also quite malleable when you want to ease some extra in there. So that was pretty easy to do. So here you can see my dilemma at the bottom of the quilt. So here's my red snapper bar under there. So there's fabric around that of backing. I just, you know, it's not all accessible to me where I am now. So I'm going to base down close to it. Oh, I've got to raise my bar a little bit. Raise the bar. So I'm going to base down close to my red snapper and then run a big stitch basting thread all the way across, holding things in place. I have to advance a little further. What was I thinking? I won't go too close. There's no point in making myself miserable trying to get across there. Okay, so I've got a 3/4 inch basting stitch on. It's pretty nice and straight right now against that red snapper tool, but I'm certainly going to take the opportunity as I stitch across this to double check that my seam lines are running straight and everything's, you know, staying just beautifully straight. I'm putting one clamp on the right hand edge just to hold things in place firmly while I go. Just taking my time. Again, flannel has so much give to it, which can both work against you and for you. So I'm going to let it work for me here. And wherever I need, I will ease a little bit in, but it's actually going pretty smoothly. fox's little nose. Just in case any of you has a Gamble machine, and this may work for some other brands too. A couple of weeks ago I was doing a basting stitch and you guys were watching, and the needle kept catching, not quite lifting out of the fabric like it ought to. And so when Lucy the long arm was broken down here week before last, we were troubleshooting a number of things, and among them was the needle up down sensor. And it turns out, there's a funny jog, it turns out that that sensor was not quite right, and so it wasn't reading when the needle was up and when the needle was down. And in particular, it was doing that single stitch too quickly, and it's a magnet in there that catches it at the top or at the bottom, right, and forces it to stop, and that magnet wasn't quite catching it. So all of that to say, I was able to make that adjustment fairly easily, and now I can baste without my needle catching the fabric when I'm moving back and forth. I gotta get far enough down to get to those whole trees in there. I think that'll do it right there. So I think what we'll do here, I'm going to go ahead and change over to the brown thread and go ahead and stitch some of the grassy designs so that you guys can see them. I have to decide on my tree trunks. Here's a quandary. My tree trunk seams go toward the trunk. They're not pressed open. And yet, I don't want to stitch white ditch thread. You can kind of see on camera. I've got some blue up here. I've got brown down here. In other areas, I've got the trunk against green. So I don't really want to edge stitch my trunk in white. So I think I'm going to make the executive decision to edge stitch it in the same brown that I used for the grasses. And I may stitch actually on the hillside of the seam and see how it looks. We're going to change thread to a grassy sort of color. No, I'm fine, thank you. So in all, I am using 5 colors of thread, and I probably could have got away with 4. I could have done the same kind of coppery / brown in both the sun and the grass, but since I have to change because they're in totally different areas of the quilt anyway, I'm doing a much more tan in the grass, golden tan, and I did a very coppery color in the sun. And as you see, when I'm not changing bobbin threads and winding new bobbins and all of that, it's fairly quick to just change the top thread. Like that. Thread the needle in. Good to go again. I'm just going to take a sec to get a little piece of batting and clean my needle area. Flannel is so flannelly, so fuzzy, and I'm just getting a lot of lint buildup. So I just take a little tiny corner of batting in the corner of my seam ripper, push it through my hopper, brush it around a little bit, much better. That lint always seems to have a buildup of grease in it because I oil my machine quite a lot. So what I don't want to happen is for a little oily lump of lint to fall and land on my quilt. Okay, we're in business. Now I'm going to come back and do the edges of the trees with the green because that's what I've been doing on all the other trees, so I will not edge stitch in the brown. So I'm just going to do a small area of this grass The thing is, if my bottom was intact, which it's not, I'm not sure which camera I'm looking at here, I would actually be starting at the bottom and kind of working my way up, because I'm going to build it a little bit like a fan, one upon another. But it's not very exacting, so I'm just going to start somewhere here where it's comfortable and work up to the top, and then this is the area that I'll come back and do later. So I'm just going to begin. There is not a particular rhyme or reason to this one. I just do a little arc and then a couple little sprigs of grass. And some of the arcs are more than others. And they kind of just represent little hillocks. And I don't even particularly do them in rows. In fact, I avoid putting them in rows. So again, it looks like uneven, hills one behind another. Does that make sense? So I am not by any means an artist. This is as close as I come to something that's artistic. Mostly I'm doing 3 little fronds, but certainly some could have 2 or 4, be longer or shorter. It's not a big deal. And I'm just going to travel along my tree edge. And that's it. That's my interpretation of little grassy hillocks. And it just adds a little bit of texture and keeps there from being any open areas that have no quilting, while there's other areas that have a lot of quilting. And I'm going to come back later and do a complete edge stitch along the edge of that tree. So all those little lines of travel that I'm creating will kind of disappear into that. I'm going to go up there and get a little bit in and travel back down right on top. So that's my little grassy tundra. So that's basically it for my grasses. I think I can fit a few more in up here actually. Let's go ahead and get that tree branch in, or tree trunk. There we go. And I might as well trace this trunk down as far as I can go, if I can figure out where I put my ruler. There it is. Against the brown for sure, this thread looks very nice and disappears well into that ditch. What that will look like against the white, I'm not sure until I try it. And of course I can't remember what I did on quilt number 1. It doesn't really matter. So that's the grassy plain, folks. Alrighty, we have a comment or two. Sandy, great interpretation of grassy knolls. That brings a whole new meaning to a grassy knoll, doesn't it? Linda, I agree, Sandy. Excellent. Well, I'm glad I got it right. You know, it's very casual. It's very casual, but honestly, this is a fairly casual, natural quilt, so I feel like it suits. So I think that's the bulk of it for today. Yeah, I think we'll leave it at that. And personally, I need a bite of lunch. I don't know about you guys. So just a quick recap before I go. This has been a quilt pattern that I'm working on by Janet Nesbitt called The Mountains Are Calling. And it's for a client. And she agreed that I could quilt it on camera for you today so that you could see this, because it is a very unique quilt. Am I right? I don't see that many quilts that are really pictorial like this. So I thought that that would be fun to see the different textures and things that I was trying to create. So this has been a live and unscripted episode. I do these usually on Monday or Tuesday and every 2 weeks anyway, sometimes a little oftener, with the idea in mind that quilters viewing them can just kind of look over my shoulder in my studio and see how I work through things and how I deal with crazy problems like getting too close to the edge of my backing at the bottom. Because this stuff sort of happens when you're quilting. So that's how I deal with things like that. I would really appreciate if you would like and subscribe. You could leave a review on Facebook if you like, or subscribe to my YouTube channel. And on YouTube particularly, if you hit the bell after you've subscribed, then you will get notifications whenever new episodes are uploaded. So within about 24 hours, this will be uploaded in the form of a replay, which you can then watch as often as you like, and you can skip over the boring parts when I'm talking and things like that. So that's totally up to you. Don't forget to have a listen to the little podcast, Measure Twice, Cut Once, interviews with quilters and encouraging stories from them. So yeah, I think that about caps it for today. You guys have a great rest of the day. And for those of you that are watching from the other side of the world, don't forget to get 40 winks tonight too. So until next time, happy quilting.